Hi guys, my name is Emily. Welcome back to my channel. Today is December 11th. I am filming this video to sort of be released alongside the Top 5 Wednesday for this week. We're supposed to talk about our top 5 books of 2017, and I have more than 5 books. I went through my Goodreads and I sort of reminded myself what I read this year, and I pulled out some of the things that really stood out to me as books that I really enjoy. I also went through my really late mid-year book freakout tag, in which we were also supposed to talk about our favorite book of the year, and I picked 4 across 3 marketing categories, and I've sort of grouped the books by those categories again today. And I'm going to start with picture books. So the first picture book that I read in 2017 that I really enjoyed and I think is worth mentioning again is Interstellar Cinderella by Deborah Underwood and Meg Hunt. So this is a retelling of Cinderella in which Cinderella is a space mechanic. What I really like about the story is that Cinderella is agentic. She doesn't want the prince, she wants the job. And I think that's really important, and I really like the illustrations on top of all of that. They're sort of muted colors, but also really vibrant, and I think it's just a really visually interesting book. The next book I have here is actually another Heather's pick. It's The Day the Crayons Quit by Drew Daywalt and illustrated by Oliver Jeffers. So this is the story of the crayons who are all quitting because they feel that they are being used inappropriately or overused, and they would like to do other things. They would like to be seen as more multifaceted than just one single outward physical trait. The message here is very much about looking beyond the surface and about recognizing that people have other desires than what you may assume they want from their outward appearance. Again, I love Oliver Jeffers' illustration style. I really love the illustrations throughout and the little letters from each color. I just think it's really well done. And the next 2 books I have here are Missing Nimama and Stolen Words, both written by Melanie Florence but illustrated by François Thisdale and Gabriele Grimard. These are pieces of Canadian Indigenous literature that tell 2 really important stories. One tells a story of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada, and one tells the story of the loss of language due to colonialism and residential schools. And I think they are both really important stories, and they are both really well done. I love the color palettes in both of them, and what I like about this book in particular is that we have Cree in the pages. Sort of the Cree words are in all of the illustration. I love what these are doing. I love Melanie Florence. She's a really cool human. I had the opportunity to hear her speak this year at the Telling Tales Children's Lit Festival at Westfield Heritage Village, Pioneer Village in Hamilton, Ontario. So moving on to my next marketing category, I have middle grade or young readers, books for 9 to 12-year-olds essentially. And for that I have 3 here. The first being The Lotteries +1 by Emma Donoghue. So this is something that I've talked about on my channel before. It is something that I have a review for that is still unedited. It's some of the stale content I'm trying to get through in the rest of 2017. This is a story of 2 queer couples who come together to co-parent biological and adopted children, and they live in this big house in Toronto, and it has a very Toronto feel. It has a very Canadian summer feel, which is part of the reason I like it. The other thing is the conflict in the story. So a very conservative Catholic grandfather is dealing with Alzheimer's and is brought to live in this house, and one of the children, Sumac, who is our narrative point of view, really struggles with Grumps and his whole attitude towards their family. It's a really great story. It's not perfect. There are plenty of reviews online that are critical of the treatment of Brian, but I think overall what this book does is provide a really nice stepping stone within this marketing category. So if the market supports such a diverse book in the same way that like The Hate You Give has opened the doorway for more stories like it, I hope that The Lotteries +1 will open more doorways The next book I have here is Wonder by R.J. Palacio. This is the story of Augie Pullman, who has a facial difference, and the ways in which he is treated by his peers when he goes from being homeschooled to a more traditional classroom setting. I really, really enjoyed this story. I was so deeply attached to Augie's narrative. This story moved me in so many ways, and once again, I think it's really important to see difference represented in children's literature, and difference represented in a way that isn't monstrosity, because so often we see villainous figures in children's literature represented as disfigured in some way. I haven't seen the movie. I want to see the movie. If I see the movie, I will let you know my thoughts on the movie. The next book I have here, again in the 9 to 12 marketing category, is George by Alex Gino. So this is a story of Melissa. Melissa is a trans girl who wants more than anything to play Charlotte in the school play of Charlotte's Web, but her school refuses to let her even audition for this role because they view her as a boy and Charlotte is not for boys. The author does talk about transitioning in the back of the book. It provides a lot of resources for young folks or for teachers or parents reading this book with their young person. The author also talks about the title, which dead names Melissa. And so the title comes from a play on Boy George. It was supposed to be Girl George, but publishers felt that George would be more accessible and include a wider audience than calling this book Girl George. So the author sort of regrets the title choice, which they talk about at the back of the book. Now we're going to move on to YA literature, or literature for teens and young adults. We're going to start with one of my personal favorites, which is Goodbye Days by Jeff Zentner. This is a story that looks at grief. So Carver has sent a text message to his friends while they were driving. He sent a text specifically to the driver, knowing that the driver always responds to texts the fastest. And of course the driver does respond to his text and gets in an accident, and all three of his best friends are killed in their final year of high school. And so it's about Carver dealing with this grief, dealing with the grief of his friends' families, and working through this massive loss, this massive trauma in his life. Now, the reason that I like this so much is I expected this to be super didactic. Don't use your cell phone and drive, kids. In many ways it is. It is a didactic novel. It does specifically want to teach young people about the dangers of texting and driving, but I feel like it's really not shoving that aspect down your throat. Plus, I thought it was really well written. I really enjoyed it. It is one of the few novels that moved me to tears. The next book I have here is the Indigo Teen Staff Pick of the Month for September, and that is The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. Everybody's talked about this a lot, myself included, so I'll be brief. It is a really important read. It is a really good read. Again, opening doors within the publishing industry for more things like this. Like, if you look at Dear Martin, pick up a copy of Dear Martin the next time you're in a bookstore and look at the design choices that have been made for Dear Martin compared to The Hate U Give. We're seeing other own voices stories like this because there is a market for these stories. And the last book I have here is If I Was Your Girl by Meredith Russo, which tells the story of, I can never remember characters' names, Amanda, who is a trans woman, and she has moved to a new school and she is passing as a woman. And so this book looks at not the coming out narrative. This is about Amanda existing in the world and being read as a woman and experiencing sexism in addition to transphobia. It's a perspective that I hadn't seen before, and I think everybody needs to read this. It's really important to read from perspectives that are not your own, and this is really good. So now we're going to move on to adult fiction. A lot of the ones that I really enjoyed are fantasy literature, so I am going to start with Uprooted by Naomi Novik. So this is a story of Agnieszka, who is taken away from her community to live in a tower with the local sorcerer called the Dragon. The Dragon is there to protect the locals from the encroaching woods, which is just poisonous and toxic and looking to infect people with just evilness, as well as looking to expand its borders. It is the story of Agnieszka and the dragon's relationship. It is the story of Agnieszka finding herself and her magic. It's just dark and horrific. Like, I could easily see horror lovers branching into this area of fantasy just because the woods are such an overpowering force. So good. I have talked about this so many times, and it continues to be one of my favorites. I am looking forward to rereading it. Branching off that, because I read Uprooted, you guys recommended that I pick up The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. So again, I believe Uprooted is Polish. Don't hold me to that. The Bear and the Nightingale is largely inspired by Russian history and Russian folklore and fairy tales. I'm gonna call her Vasilisa, that's what I was calling her in my head the whole time. So this is the story of Vasilisa, the youngest daughter. Vasilisa can see the spirits or the guardians of the various places. So everything that exists has a guardian of sorts. It's part of like the pagan religion of the area. And so when a Catholic priest comes to Vasilisa's village and starts to pray and convince the people not to pay any sort of homage to the spirits, they start to dwindle, and the village starts to feel the effects of this because these were protecting them from the darker evil things. I loved the folk and fairy tale aspects of it. I really want to pick up some Russian fairy tales now and sort of see these figures, because the author isn't bullshitting this. She has a degree in Russian history and like has studied Russian folklore. It's based in things, and I want to read those things now. But I loved the atmosphere of this, so much so that before I was even finished this, I picked up the sequel, The Girl in the Tower. I needed more of Vasilisa and her adventures. And what I really liked about both of these is Vasilisa's struggle against gender norms, the expectations for women in medieval Russia. It is so beautiful, so wonderful. I loved these. Next two books I have here for favorite fantasy of the year is Every Heart a Doorway and Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Shannon Maguire. These are two pieces of fantasy literature that play with and subvert fantasy tropes. Given my master's thesis and my interest in fantasy literature and genre and subversion, these were phenomenal. These are doing the things that I want them to do. So the first one is about a girl who comes back through a portal. So she's existed in this fantasy space and she's really happy there, but she went back through the portal and now she's in the real world and she's like, this sucks. And so she ends up at a boarding school for these wayward children who have been in the fantasy space, come back, and are now totally lost. I really enjoyed this. This is sort of a prequel focusing on two of the characters that we meet in this book, and we are actually in the fantasy space in this book, and we see what life in this fantasy space is like. Really enjoyed both of these. Think these are doing phenomenal things. I have the third book pre-ordered and I am so excited for it. Also, lots of diverse representation in here. If you've seen the hype around these, I think they're definitely worth picking up, especially if you're really familiar with fantasy literature and a lot of the genre tropes. Next book that I have here is, I mean, at this point I don't know where to put it, but we put it in the horror section at the bookstore, and that is The Dark Tower by Stephen King. So over the course of this year, over the course of 2017, I have been working on reading the Dark Tower series. This is going to turn into a sort of extended project. Hopefully I got the video out on Monday, December 11th, with the projected plans for the project. If not, you will see that in the near future. This is just sort of a stand-in for the whole series. This isn't necessarily my favorite book in the series, but The Dark Tower is a new favorite piece of literature. It is something that I really am fascinated by. It's something I'm looking forward to working on in the future because there's just so much here. There's so much to be analyzed. This was a really great reading experience as somebody who is now out of school and who is sorely missing all of the essays and discussions. Like, this has been phenomenal, and I am looking forward to continuing to work on it. If you're not familiar, this is the story of Roland of Gilead, who is the last gunslinger, and he is on the journey, he is on a quest to find the Dark Tower. Along the way, he picks up friends to help him on his journey. They become part of his quartet, and they go on this epic journey across the universe, basically, to get to the Dark Tower. Some parts feel like dystopia, some parts feel like fantasy, some parts feel like horror, some parts feel like Western. It is a real genre stew. Wouldn't complete the year without mentioning my favorite piece of nonfiction, my favorite new YouTuber, Caitlin Dowdy's The Smoke It's in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory. So this book really came along at like the right point in my life. I don't know which video it was, but like I gushed about this book a whole lot. First of all, I found it fascinating to have a lot of my questions about death and the funeral industry answered in such honest terms. I find Caitlin's practice, her green funeral practice, really fascinating, and I love her storytelling. Part of what I'm noticing, because I'm also reading Mary Roach's Stiff, which is also answering questions about corpses and dead bodies, but she doesn't have the same storytelling flair, and that is what makes this so compelling. And I have enjoyed both of her books, but this one in particular. So those are my top books of 2017. I don't know if these are going to stand the test of time, but these are the books that I really, really enjoyed this year, looking back on this year. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below what some of your favorite reads from 2017 are, and I will see you soon. Bye!